Music therapy has ancient roots. It was Pythagoras who was first known to use music prescriptively for people's emotional and physical maladies. Those ancient intuitions, which certainly would have been going on long before the time of the Greeks, have become the predecessors and the foundation for the modern practice of music therapy. This practice has now been conjoined with neuroscience to help advance music-based interventions for diseases and disorders of a wide variety. Have you ever stopped to wonder when we begin to respond to music? It actually begins in the womb. Human responsiveness to music begins in the womb. In the last trimester of fetal life, baby is able to hear external sound. That sound comes through for speech and for music, and they're able to detect the musical elements of both, so much so that they will respond differently to music and stories that they've heard previously than ones that are unfamiliar to them and novel. This implies a memory capacity for the musical elements of speech and for music. In the first years of life, those musical distinctions will allow the child to learn speech and language. For children who are born tone deaf, they are at a disadvantage in learning speech and language, and it actually will impair their reading abilities down the road. Currently in Boston, there are studies going on that identify the ability of 3-year-olds to tell the difference between poo, poo. And if those children think those sound the same, then they are tagged as potential dyslexics. This is a disorder that won't be diagnosed for another 3 to 5 years. It is music that's assessing and will provide interventions to support that child, so perhaps they won't have to deal with the challenges and the setbacks of dyslexia. EEGs at birth, a brain imaging technology, show that babies can detect the beat in music. Newborns can detect the beat in music. If I ask my students, my wonderful music students, what is the beat, define it, and describe it, I get these big blank stares. They're rendered speechless. They don't know how to describe it. And they end up saying something like, we just know it, which is true. And now science informs us because children are brought into this world with that capacity to detect the beat, when the next one will fall. And if you've seen YouTube videos of babies moving to music at about 6 months old and older, it is so much fun to see that. It's joyous. And yet that's the first time they can actually organize their bodies to demonstrate what their brains have already known. So you wonder why. The next logical question is, why are we like that? And we'd have to look back in our evolutionary past for evidence that music was used to facilitate people accomplishing great tasks together, things that they couldn't have done as individuals. So sea shanties are a body of music that rhythmically helped organize, motivate, and sustain the efforts of sailors going around the world. What shall we do with a drunken sailor? What shall we do with a drunken sailor? And by doing that, they were able to lift heavy lines that had anchors at the end of them, to hoist massive sails, to load and unload cargo, and to row all at the same time. Because if they hadn't been able to accomplish this work together with the power of rhythmic music, there would have been chaos. Work would have come to a halt. And the work was drudgery. How would you maintain and sustain your effort across time? And it was music. And perhaps that's why we're born this way. This innate capacity to entrain to the beat, to move to the beat, does not seem to change across the lifespan. We're born with it, and we die with it. Even if you have a movement disorder that you acquire, like Parkinson's disease or a stroke. Research shows that we as music therapists can use this organizing element of rhythm to help facilitate people walking better with a stroke. Just by adding music, they walk like you and I do, for the most part. We can also help sustain the functional mobility of people with Parkinson's disease, a long, chronic disease process. And what we're looking at here are brain-based treatments for brain-based disorders. We're not looking at the paralyzed leg. We're not looking at the symptom. We're addressing the cause. We're changing the underlying neural mechanisms, the place that has the stroke that can no longer communicate to the body. And I find that really exciting, the promise of doing this. As a speech therapist, I've used music with great success across a variety of disorders. For example, children with autism, I've noticed across my years, respond better to sung cues than to spoken ones. And science informs why this may be so. There's a structure called the arcuate fasciculus in the brain. And in the brains of nonverbal young children with autism, it's thicker on the right hemisphere than it is on the left. And why that matters is the right hemisphere is predominant for melody. The left hemisphere is predominant for speech. So maybe this is the entry point into their world, the way to call them into ours, to use music to facilitate a sense of identity of sound, discrimination amongst sounds, and the ability to understand that sounds have meaning and have them participate. It essentially jumpstarts their speech and language development. With people who have had strokes, we can use music as a therapeutic application to facilitate repairs of their speech and language network. Once again, the arcuate fasciculus may have a role here, for it is larger in professional singers than it is in non-singers. And this indicates our use of singing-based protocols to help repair the networks, the compensatory networks, so that people can optimally recover, so that they can share their thoughts, feelings, opinions, and needs with others. Now, music therapists paired with neurologists are leveraging the power of music with a great deal of success across many disciplines. And this type of medicine comes with its own sugar, its own spoonful of sugar, so to speak, because music is inviting, it's fun, it's non-invasive, and it has great meaning. It's familiar and dear to us all. On a nearly daily basis, we all use music to find comfort, to find relaxation, and to find motivation. As music therapists, we use those connections with people when they're in pain, when they're afraid, when they're facing the great challenges of their life, when they have a child with a disability, or when they become disabled themselves. We can use music for comfort when people have been admitted into hospice care. And this is Kevin. For Kevin, comfort meant creating the music of his own funeral and a love song for his wife. It gave him so much meaning. For others, music induces a relaxation response that really helps them in various trials. I certainly was in a serenity bubble today of Schubert and Finzi and Elgar as I prepared to deliver my best here today, to access the relaxation response so I wouldn't be buckled by a stress. We can do that for people preparing for surgeries because a beating, thumping, stressed heart is difficult to overcome with anesthesia. You need a lot more. Perhaps by coming into that experience in the relaxation response through the gift of music, people require less anesthesia, less pain medication, and have a more satisfying experience. We can also use music to induce the relaxation response for women who are preparing to give birth, for spouses who are buckling under the burden of caregiving. We can also use it for people when they've been diagnosed with cancer. And I can say that anxiety is probably the biggest byproduct of such a diagnosis. And in the 15 months of my chemotherapy experience, I benefited greatly from the people, my beloved friends who came and made music with me, for me, and because of me. And in the days when nobody was available, I was sustained by the music that I chose to listen to. Anything from the Talking Heads to Louis Armstrong to opera and some Bob Marley. It gave me hope. I believe it worked with the medicine. Medicine that had it spilled on my skin would have burned like acid was being put into my body. My ability to take those treatments was greatly benefited by being in the relaxation response and working with and not against the drugs. And we can use music clinically to help motivate people to do their best physically. And I'll ask you, would any of you go to a gym class when the speakers were broken? When the music wasn't there, would you continue to do jumping jacks together and other Zumba moves? No, it's absurd, and yet there's so many areas where people need that motivation, just like the sailors had with their sea shanties to sustain and maximize their effort. That's very much so for cardiac rehabilitation, for neurorehabilitation, and people's desire for wellness. So in my opinion, music therapy is standing up well to the test of time and to the rigors of modern science. And the changing currents in healthcare require that we give efficacious practices, that we are able to bring valid and reliable treatments to people in their times of need, whether they're acquired or congenital issues. Also, we are able to bring powerful resources to the clients, the patients, and their families. So, if when you see me come into an educational or medical facility with a guitar on my back, or any of my dear colleagues, please don't presume that we're there to entertain or to perform. That's a magical byproduct of what it is that we do. And the stories we have and share and tell are phenomenal in that way. But what we have principally come to do is to create neural changes that result in functional outcomes to address stress, pain, fear, speech, language, cognition, and movement. We're there to create true and lasting differences. And you know the best part of all of this? Not only do I get to work in the magic and power of music and the power in information that comes from science, but it's all embedded in a clinical relationship that's built on compassion, empathy, being of service to our fellow humans. It's a really beautiful way to work. And so I invite you to invite us to come into your life at times when you are in fear or in pain or deeply challenged or disabled. And I thank you so much for your kind attention to the works of my beloved profession. It really is a pleasure.